Hi, Kevin Coop here, and this is FaceTime with the Content Guy. So the broad canvas on which we paint here at Morning Newsbeat really focuses on consumers and retailing. And so it would be some kind of punditry malpractice, if you will, if I didn't focus a lot, almost exclusively sometimes, on change and innovation. I mean, that's the red meat of what we do, isn't it? And so I think I've been thinking a lot about that this week because of my trip last Friday and my reporting this Tuesday on Be Fresh, the new Ahold format created by their Fresh Formats division up in the Allston neighborhood of Boston. And if you read the piece, you know that I was really impressed by this store. I thought it was terrific. 10,000 square feet, telling a great story, highly relevant to that neighborhood market in which they find themselves. I think it has the opportunity, as they roll it out, to be a real big game changer for Ahold. But I think, in some ways, as impressed as I was with the store, I may have been more impressed by the fact that Ahold let this happen, right? Ahold basically created this Fresh Formats division, hired great people, and sort of set them off and said, do something different, create a game changer. And I think that's really impressive. I think when companies do that, I think for companies to create sustainable business models going down the road, that's what they have to do. You have to hire great people and then give them lots of autonomy. And you have to not just loosen the leash, but set them loose. Say, listen, do something different. Create change. Hey, listen, you're going to fail sometimes, but that's what you really need to do. And I think that's what companies need to do these days in order to be successful. There's so much change going on around them, so many companies trying to disrupt them from the outside, that the only way to compete is to sort of do a lot of disruption from the inside. And the reason retailers have to do that, quite frankly, is because that's what the culture is doing. That's what's happening in the culture in a much broader sense. One of the reasons I really like Be Fresh is because the store I saw in Boston, in Allston, that's an urban market, 10,000 square feet. But the next one they do is going to be in Fairfield, Connecticut, which is very much a suburb. It's just basically up the road from where I live. And that's going to be a suburban store. So they're going to have to adapt it. They're going to have to make some changes in terms of probably some marketing and some merchandising and product selection and things like that. But it's basically the whole notion of creating a fresh, food service oriented store with highly engaged employees who can engage with the consumer. That's going to remain intact, although they're going to obviously tweak it as they go along. And it's interesting they're doing that in a suburb next, because it reflects a broader trend that's going on. We've all read about the stories that talk about how millennials are moving out of the suburbs and they're moving back to the cities. And at the same time, you have baby boomers who are saying, I want to go back to the cities. Why? Well, for different reasons. They find the cities more relevant to how they want to live their lives. So what's interesting now is you find architects and planners in towns like Fairfield and like the town in which I live, where they're saying, hey, listen, we have to kind of create urban centers or almost urban centers in the suburbs so we can be relevant to consumers. And that's fascinating to me. Listen, for my money, it makes the suburbs a lot more attractive to me if they kind of create urban centers in those places. Listen, they want millennials to move back into the suburbs and they want the baby boomers to stay, but that's going to take some effort. And as those things happen in the broader culture, in the broader economy, well, retailers have to pay attention and figure out how they are going to create stores that are going to kind of fit into that model that are going to attract millennials, baby boomers, and other generations as their needs and desires change. I sit here in my kitchen, right? And I can't help think to myself, boy, how is this going to change? I mean, listen, I'm old enough to remember when we got our first microwave, and that seemed like, whoa. But I'm sure in the next few years, there's going to be all sorts of changes that are going to take place that are going to affect this room. They're going to affect how I shop. They're going to affect how I prepare food. They're going to affect how I eat. Retailers have to be on the cutting edge of that. You can't wait to have things happen and then sort of pick up on it. It's really important to drive the change, as opposed to just react to the change. It's interesting. Not that long ago, I was in New York City. I was in Manhattan, and we were going out to a Mets game. So we were going to do something we didn't do a lot. We took the number 7 subway from Manhattan out to Flushing, Queens, so we could go to Citi Field. And I have to say, first of all, it was pretty efficient, I guess, getting out there. But this train, I mean, it was rickety and it was loud and it felt like maybe early 20th century transportation as opposed to 21st century transportation. And basically, that's when those lines were created, at the early part of the 20th century. And I found myself wondering as we were on the train, and listen, it could have been 1948, except for all these people had their iPhones out. I find myself wondering, is there somebody at the state or city, or I guess even federal level, who's looking at something like the number 7 train and wondering to themselves, okay, how are we going to replace this for the 22nd century? What are we going to have to do to make this kinds of transportation relevant and efficient in the 22nd century? And now you may look at me and say, 22nd century, it's only 2015. But that means that the 22nd century is really only 85 years away. And I mean it when I say 85 years away, because listen, we know time passes so quickly now. So many changes take place so quickly. You have to start thinking right now about what things are going to look like 85 years from now. I think you have to do it if you're a city or a town planner. You have to do it if you're in charge of mass transportation. And you have to do it as a retailer. You have to at least start thinking that way. And if there are retailers out there thinking to themselves, well, Jesus, he's full of it. 85 years, we don't know what's going to happen in 8 years. That's true. But I'll bet you Jeff Bezos is thinking about 85 years from now. Hell, he's probably thinking, hell, how am I going to do 1 hour delivery to Mars? But that's another issue completely. Anyway, that's what's on my mind this Thursday morning. And as always, I want to hear what's on your mind.